MA students, you can turn in your textbooks to the Medicare chapter. I'm looking at the first page on page 392. Just a quick run through of some of the high points that I want you to remember from this chapter. On page 392, it's going to be very important for you to read through the eligibility requirements for Medicare. Medicare Part A and Medicare Part B are listed here for you. Halfway through that paragraph, it says he or she is automatically enrolled in Medicare Parts A and B starting on the first day of the month that the individual turns 65 years of age, with enough applicable work credits that are equal to 10 years of full-time employment. If you look down, it says Medicare is a federal health insurance program for the following categories of people, and it lists number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, all of these people, okay, and how they meet the eligibility for the program. So Part A is the hospital side of things. It's hospital or inpatient coverage. Part B is outpatient type coverage or clinic type coverage. Part A automatically comes. Part B, you have to pay, a premium. Take a look at the health insurance card on page 393. It's exactly what they look like. At the bottom in the writing on page 393, this is something I always take time to go through with my students, because if you look at the Medicare number, and Medicare numbers are changing, there's some alphas, okay? Besides just the numbers, there's some alphas sometimes connected, always connected with the Medicare number. And those are delineated out for you kind of at the bottom of 393 and up over on page 394. So those are something that you should read through and kind of pay attention to. When we look at the types of coverage, things like this, the figure 12.3 talks about the 5 major classifications of Part A benefits. That's a really good table. It is more your inpatient, so it's hospitalization, nursing, facility care, home health. When you look at Medicare Part B, that's table 12.1, and it kind of goes on for miles here. All of page 396, all of page 397. All of page 398 and page 399 covers Type B or Part B benefits for you. Now, Medicare Part C is something you need to pay attention to. Medicare Part C, they say it's a Medicare Advantage plan. Sometimes you hear them called Advantage plan. They talked about Medicare Choice. Okay, that's kind of where the C came from. Medicare Part C is something that you sign up voluntarily for. It's your option. You don't have to. But if you have Medicare Part C, you do not have regular Medicare anymore. Okay? A lot of people, Medicare Part C or Medicare Advantage or Medicare Choice has policies out there available through like Aetna, or Continental General has a Medicare Part C plan. If you choose that plan, you don't have your straight Medicare anymore. Lots of patients will try to give you their Medicare card and their Continental General card that they have, Medicare Part C through. No. Okay, your Medicare card is obsolete now. That's something that isn't marketed or educated to these types of patients very well, so you got to be careful with that. So Medicare Part C is important for you to look through. Medicare Part D, D stands for drugs, so it's the prescription drug program through Medicare. Read about the donut hole. The donut hole is kind of interesting, and they talk about that on page 400. Okay, there's a good example on the top of page 401, example 12.1, that's good for you. And just the tiny little paragraph right before it. It says a provider who prescribes a drug that can be covered by either Part B or Part D. So some drugs are covered under Part B, but not a lot. Okay? The doctor has to clarify the condition and then the part of coverage on the prescription form. And they give us an example in the box. Okay, and also underneath that box is important. A bonus is given to any provider who e-prescribes or electronically prescribes drugs as of 2010. Okay, so that's good. The e-prescribing and the e-reporting is really good. That's where, you don't take your paper prescription with you to your drugstore. It's just there when you get there. Okay, doctors can get bonuses for using that, so that's cool. Employed elderly benefits is talked about on page 401. That's kind of important when they talk about Medicare, Medicap. Medicare secondary payer on page 402 is a good spot to read through when it would be a secondary payer. If you have an elderly person who is Medicare eligible but is working full-time and has insurance coverage through their work, maybe it's at a factory, maybe it's at McDonald's, I don't know, wherever it may be. Their work insurance is primary and Medicare becomes secondary. So if they are employed and working, okay, you have to be careful with how their insurance setup is. Let's see. Really, I don't think you need to know much about Medicare managed care plans on page 404. Page 405, I don't think we need to talk about that too much either. Participating and non-participating providers is talked about on page 406, and you can read through this. The figure 12.7 here, that kind of brownish or tan looking box on page 407, is a good one to read through the examples. Basically, it's important, and this is important for you in your life right now, and to be educated about it, and your parents and your family and your friends. Do we go to a participating provider or a non-participating provider? Well, we think participating, right? Okay. The difference between those is if a provider does not participate with Medicare, it means they don't have to follow the rules, anything like that. They also don't get paid. Okay. The patient will get paid, and the patient has to turn around and pay the doctor. So the patient becomes the middleman. It's never really a great idea. Okay. Also, what happens is if you go to a participating provider and you have an office visit for, say, $125, and because they're participating, Medicare will say, well, we will cover, $100 of, that coverage. Sorry about that. I had an interruption. So if you have an office visit for $125 and it's a participating provider, so they say, Medicare says, you're a participating provider, we're going to cover $100 of that $125. We allow $100. Where does that extra $25 go? It gets written off, okay, for a participating provider. But if I went to a non-par or a non-participating provider, we call them non-par, and $125 was my office visit, Medicare is going to allow $100. That extra $25, they turn around and sock it to the patient. They have every right to, because they don't participate with Medicare and their rules and the regulations. So a participating provider agrees to write off those balances and not turn around and charge them to their patients. That's a benefit for us. So it's really super important to read through that on page 406 and understand it. That's really, really good. ABNs are talked about, prior authorization is talked about, and that's some stuff that you guys might have to help with in your jobs descriptions on page 409, prior authorizations. You might have to call it in, you might have to do it electronically now, so you can read through that. Their forms and things, that we have to fill out. ABNs and waivers are talked about, and that's kind of a big deal on page 409. Medicare has its own ABN, and the actual form is on page 410, and it's filled out so you can see how it works. So that's really good kind of to look through as well. Otherwise, a lot of this, the rest of this pages of the chapter, and I'm like on page 414, page 415, a lot of this is stuff that you don't really have to get into that deep and know about. Page 416 is a place that I kind of have starred and highlighted and take time for, as well as read through that time limit. Okay, this is timing for claims. So you might want to read through that on page 416. One thing that Medicare does different, they talk about it on page 418. the blue heading that says Medicare Summary Notice, or MSN. The Medicare Summary Notice is what they call the document that they send to their patients in the mail. Now, for regular insurance, and we probably went through this before, for regular people and with regular insurance, it's called an EOB, an Explanation of Benefits. Okay, you get it in the mail, you see how much was charged, how much the patient has to pay, how much went to deductible, right, how much the provider, got paid. So an explanation of benefits is what we call that document that goes to the patient on the, commercial side, of insurance. But on the Medicare side, they have their own name for it. It's called the Medicare Summary Notice. So you can read about that on page 418. That's pretty good. You can look at, pictures. You can Google up Medicare Summary Notice and see images of them, things like that online. The remittance advice, or the RA, is what the provider gets that says this is how much we paid, and blah, 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 blah. And there's a copy, an image of a remittance advice, or an RA, on page 420. That's really good to look at. And then basically that's it for the chapter. One thing just to remember, Medicare is all encompassing. CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is the government that deals with Medicare and Medicaid, and that's why we put these two chapters together for you. They have a lot of different rules. So when we teach, for instance, in my HIT classes, coding, I say, if you code for Medicare, do them all together. Group your Medicare charges together and bill them out, because there's a lot of things you have to think about when you're doing that, because they have so many different rules and regulations. Regular commercial carriers, no big deal. Do them all together, at the end of the day. Keep your brain fresh for your Medicare people and do them at the beginning of the day. Things like that. Medicare has a lot of rules. They have different codes that they get to make up and we have to use. But the one thing with Medicare and Medicaid too is that, they're so strict with their rules and they have so many that they make up. Lots of people follow them. Lots of other insurance companies adopt those type of rules and follow those type of rules. They're kind of a big brother type thing. So they have a lot of strict rules for participating and things like that to deal with. So that is one thing to remember with Medicare, and both with Medicaid too. Okay, so just a quick review of the chapter. Go back and read those pages that I talked about. Thanks.